Good morning, everyone. What I'm going to try to do today is stimulate your thinking for your later discussions, but before I get started, you have to understand how I think. So I'm a big believer that reality is the best medicine. It helps you to know exactly when to act. It helps you to understand what to do and how to act. And so some of you, when I go through this, someone will say, well, we don't need to know that economic competitiveness is challenging from time to time in Arizona or in southern Arizona. We don't need to know that we just went through a great recession, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm not going to walk you back through that, but I am going to present some reality. And General Shootman and I, when we spoke about this talk a few weeks ago, said to me, that's all fine, but then we need ideas for action. And so I'm going to walk through where I think we are and what some of the issues are, and then I'm going to focus on ideas for action. Now, yesterday morning, I was in Beijing, China, and I had a chance to meet with U.S. Ambassador to China, Terry Branstad, the former governor of Iowa, who I had worked with many years ago. And Ambassador Branstad and I spent some time talking about all of the issues associated with economic competitiveness, and one of the things that he was most concerned about was this trade deficit that we have with the Chinese, and this is a significant deficit. It's a growing deficit. It's a challenging deficit, and it's indicative of good news and bad news. I'm sort of outlining for you the notion of how this works. It is what it is, and China is emerging and has emerged as a great economic power. I had not been to Beijing. I'd been all over China recently, but not been to Beijing for a couple of years. It was transformed in the 2 years since I was there last, in a noticeable and positive set of ways. All of that means positive things: more buyers for American products, more opportunities for economic opportunity and economic engagement, but the numbers don't look good today. The numbers look bad on the trade deficit today, which means that's where the focus needs to be. So, what I've done today is basically taken the liberty of saying to all of us here in Arizona and to all of us here in southern Arizona that it's time to redesign. What I mean by design is the way that things work, the way an institution works, the way an economy works, the way a region works, is always totally and completely a function of the design of the entity that's in place at the moment. So if you have a company if you're at the Sears and Roebuck Corporation with a $500 million loss that's being reported right now, what I can tell you is that somehow that design is inadequate to the present market. If you're in companies and corporations and entities that don't exist anymore, they didn't design or adjust, they may not have wanted to, but they don't exist anymore because they didn't redesign. So if I have one concept to put on the table today, it's the concept of design and the concept of redesign. And I put the word finally up here because I want to try to make the emphasis on a particular point, and that is sometimes people will argue back and forth, oh, everything's fine, you're just a doom and gloomer, you're just negative, whatever, it's all going to work out, everything's going to be good. Sorry, I can tell you before I even show any of the next slides, the time for redesign is right now. It doesn't say anything bad about the past, it just means that the time for redesign is right now. And I'm going to walk you through these quickly. So my favorite academic of all academics is Herbert Simon, Nobel Prize winner from 1978 in economics, even though he wasn't an economist. And so I think that's just fantastic. But he said, everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. The key concept is design. It's not tweak. It's not alter a little bit. It's not, you talked about charter government. You talked about this. Those are design things. The way to advance is to design, to alter the design. So I'm going to fly through this. Through Ron, we can get this to all of you. So you all know that the Arizona gross domestic product between 2005 and 2016 went through the recession is in gray. This is the change. Steep increases, very steep decline, very slow return. Just need to understand that. That is an indicator of the fact that the economic model in the past is no longer present. It's altered. This is the Tucson gross domestic product. This is all real data. We did all of this analysis, General, after you and I talked. This is not a good chart. Just take one look at that. That's not a good chart. That's not a chart of recovery. That's a chart of the fact that the system that's in place in this local regional economy has sort of leveled off. Okay, fine. Leveled off and declined, actually. This is a chart that ought to have every single person leading any organization in Arizona's attention. This is the per capita GDP, state by state by state, relative to the national average. So if the national average is the unit 100, we're now at 76% of the national average and declining after having been around 90%, the blue line at the bottom. This means that our relative competitiveness on a per person basis against these other Western states alone is not moving in the right direction. Again, time for redesign. This is not doom and gloom, far from it. This is a fantastic state, unbelievably successful, unbelievably beautiful, unbelievable potential. And so we've just sort of run that course. Now, when you've run the course, it's time to reset. So, just this overall economic data, finding steep decline, finding slow recoveries, finding historic design is maxed out and now in need of update. Action, total reconceptualization of economic and education infrastructure, meaning tweaking does not work. Tweaking cannot alter the present condition. An initiation of a design thinking process. By a design thinking process, it means actually stepping back and looking at the design as a part of your actual process of activity. Now, you've done some of that, but there may be a need for more of that. Arizona and Metro Tucson sector. This is the relative size of the economies in Arizona. Each box is the size of the economy. In Phoenix, the blue boxes are the size of the manufacturing part of the economy. Tucson, Flagstaff, Prescott, you can see the small size of non-metro Arizona, Yuma, Sierra Vista, this is the size. And so this tells you that we have a very real estate and government-oriented economy. There are no successful real estate and government-oriented economies in the competitive emerging economies around the planet. There are no such places. Those are phases. Nothing wrong with a real estate boom, nothing wrong with a real estate boom that lasts for several decades. Certainly nothing wrong with government research and government technology and military investment. Those are fantastic foundations. They are insufficient. They are necessary but insufficient. Now this chart ought to get all of your attention in a very significant way. The middle of the chart is the line 0. This tells you that since 2008, all but 3 of the sectors in this local economy are less than they were. This is a measurement in terms of approximate growth. All but 3. Now what that tells you from a good news perspective is we've maxed out. It doesn't take away from anything that anyone's already doing. Please don't read this wrong. What it tells you is that the mix is not built around growth since 2008. That's a 10-year time frame. Some of those declines, by the way, 40% and others, are very dramatic. Now, this shows you per capita personal income relative to the US average. I'm just trying to show you that Metro Detroit, which didn't come to its realization of its transformation until too late, has come to that and is now involved in a reconceptualization of itself, a redesign of itself. And if you haven't been to Detroit, or you haven't been to Pittsburgh, or you haven't been to some of these other cities that made the right decisions and redesigned and reconceptualized, well, here's where we are relative to Tucson and Phoenix. The green and the orange line are not good. So, relative to this sector summary, finding weaknesses across sectors, not one sector or 2 sectors, most sectors. Most sectors. Labor issues and income issues, and I'm going to come to that because we've tried to look at what are some of the driving factors that affect these kinds of things here. And then action, again, need new design for education and labor development. The model that we have in place is inadequate to the problem. It's too classic. We need to identify and network emerging entrepreneurs across all sectors. There's some of that going on. There needs to be a lot more of that going on. We need to target new technologies and new industries that are not present. And I'm going to show you some stuff relative to Singapore in a second. Singapore's economy is about the same size as the economy of Arizona, and they have entire sectors that didn't exist, where there wasn't a single business operating in that sector, now operating as key elements of their economy. So this is Singapore GDP. Now you got to understand, like we've been sitting around in the lap of luxury. We're talking about having maxed out a very successful economy. In Singapore, they've had to build an economy from destruction. So in 1960, they were at 20% of the GDP against the United States per capita GDP. 20%. They are now just under, right at the same GDP. Now this is like unbelievable. I'm trying to get you to understand this. This is an unbelievable achievement. How did they do that? Export-led industrialization through multinational corporations. And then finally, liberalization, promotion of innovation, development, and business services. So they picked entire sectors that they didn't have. They now have a GDP equivalent of the United States in 50 years. From 20% of the United States, now we're at 76% of the United States right now, having been at 90% of the United States. They were at 20, and in 50 years, they're at 100. And it wasn't by sitting around and thinking about whether or not the industries that they had in 1960 would be the industries around which they would build their future. It was by deciding that those industries that they had in 1960, they needed to nurture them and help them to evolve, but also by completely moving into new areas. Here's what they did. They invested in education and productivity enhancements. Now look at this. This is Singapore US GDP look at the rate of growth. This is per capita GDP. 1960, they're at 5,000. US is at 18,000. Now they're at the same level. It's an 8-fold increase in an economy about the same size as Arizona. We sit back and say, oh, well, we're doing so well. Well, we've run that course. And look how they have ups and downs, and we have ups and downs, but they have a way of moving forward. So, Metro Tucson. Now, this is something in our looking at the root of some of these issues here in Tucson, Metro Tucson, and in the Sun Corridor, workforce configuration and population. So this is an important chart. This tells you where are you relative to the U.S. population in terms of the age profile. This tells you right away that the population in Tucson, no surprise to anyone here, is somewhat older, but it has a hollowed out core between the ages of 30 and 55. Yet it has a larger number of students and a larger number of people in the younger ages, and we'll come back to that. That tells you something very, very dramatically. There are no successful, high-speed, high-change economies in the United States in any metropolitan area with this profile. So, this is not bad. This is a demographic issue. This is a demographic attraction issue. This is a way to think about things here in Metro Tucson. Now, we looked more carefully then between 2008 and 2016. And the 2008 numbers are in blue and the 2016 numbers are in orange. Just look in the two circled areas. This is a dramatic shift. Again, a hollowing out of a particular age core. So this is a demographic thing. These are all addressable, they're all workable. I'm trying to walk through what's at the root of economic competitiveness and the economic challenge. So this chart, percentage change in 25 to 34-year-old population in the 53 largest metropolitan areas in the United States. So who grew and who lost? Two metropolitan areas in the United States, Riverside, California, and Tucson, lost population in this core group. Some, if you look to the other side, New Orleans, Charlotte, Grand Rapids, San Francisco, Miami, Seattle, Orlando, Austin, San Jose, Nashville, Denver, San Antonio. Looking at New Orleans is a bit of an anomaly because it's coming back from Katrina, but let's look at the others. 20, 30, 40% increases in these populations since 2008 in their population. This is a solvable, doable, very important thing to focus on. So, finding. Retain working age population, attract millennial creatives and millennial college graduates. Action. Create innovative programs like linking the University of Arizona in new ways even beyond that, or other universities. Support development of differentiated Tucson brand. This aesthetic, the Tucson aesthetic, this unique identity that Tucson has is very, very valuable and could be potentially extremely attractive to young millennials and young millennial college graduates. It needs to be projected beyond Arizona. And then lastly, create an art and culture-driven economic sector. Now that exists here, but not at the scale that it could exist. That sector, if it was evolved here, would dramatically influence the attraction of other sectors, other young millennials, other college graduates to stay here. Now again, there's nothing new in this, but I'm trying to place it in the context of the stark reality of data. Metro Tucson labor market. So this is not good news. This is the labor market for Metro Tucson between 2008 and 2016 by level of education. So this tells you that in this labor market, jobs for people with a high school education or less are 15,000 fewer than they were in 2008 and not likely to return. Only one group, very slightly, bachelor's degrees have gone up. This is net numbers. So in your company or your area, you may be seeing all this. These are the numbers, net numbers across the area. And what this tells you is that there's a hollowing out of certain sectors for lower skill jobs that's then creating some economic destabilization, and this is not good news. So we're calling this an acute impact, a comparatively acute impact. So this is the most acute trend of any city in the United States. We looked at the 50 largest metropolitan areas. None have this. None. That's good news also. Again, the stark reality says now we know that we've run the course of the former economy as good as it has been, and now we need to move in these new directions. So finding, comparatively acute impact of educational attainment, existing infrastructures maxed out some time ago. And when I say by infrastructures mean the structures of the educational structures have been maxed out. They're not producing sufficient numbers of the kinds of people that are needed. Action, reconceptualize workforce and workforce development into a unified effort. Now, no one has pulled this off in the country yet. Colorado, I think, is taking the most significant steps. Middle skill job training, linking people together, people moving from community colleges to technical schools to universities, finding ways where things can come together. In Rhode Island, in Hawaii, in other states, in Georgia, they took the community college, perimeter community college in Georgia and made it a part of Georgia State. They're making Georgia State University. Why do they do that? They get better outcomes, more people, people able to be educated more quickly. This is what I mean by reconceptualizing everything. Support degree completion by adult learners at all levels and in quick time. So there's 1.1 million people in Arizona that went to college and never finished, including a lot of people that are 40 years old or over. If they could be incentivized to return to college, they become a quickly appropriable new element of the workforce. So this is a specific action. Build the narrative of growth and competitiveness by popularizing stories of local successes. There are so many successes in Arizona and so many successes in Tucson, fantastic stories of achievement, fantastic stories of entrepreneurship, fantastic stories of spin-outs and new ventures and new entities and so forth, and it is largely not a part of the narrative. It's not a part of the local narrative, it's not a part of the local brand. There are many similarities between Tucson and other very, very successful narrative communicators, other cities, Boulder, Colorado, Boise, Idaho, other places. Fantastic things are going on in these places, and finding a way to enhance that narrative. And then create, and this is really important, new workforce sectors. It's not just about expanding the existing workforce, it's about expanding new workforce sectors. For instance, in art and culture and entertainment and other things like that that are and can be really important. Inventiveness in Metro Tucson. These are good numbers. So Tucson is on the chart. These are all the major western cities in terms of rate of change since 2001 in patents issued, using patents as an indicator of inventiveness, not as the indicator, but as an indicator. So you can see Tucson in the middle, the blue line. Good news, this is the patents coming out of Metro Tucson since 2000 in the 500 range. Phoenix is only in the 673 range. Minneapolis in the 1600 range. Look at Seattle, 3,300. And so again, this is just a proxy. You can see this concentration. So this is a ripe place, finding growing inventiveness, not enough fertile soil for knowledge spillover, need more fertile soil, need more initiatives and linkages at all levels. And so this, General Schutman, this is down to the incentives. Now, you've got these megapolitans. Everybody knows what these are. These are the 10 places in the United States where between now and 2050, 80% of all population growth will occur and 90% of all economic growth will occur in the United States. 10 places. It turns out one of these, the Sun Corridor, you all know this, but just for those of you that might not, runs from just north of Phoenix to just south of Tucson. That Sun Corridor is one of these megapolitans. So this is a chart we spent a lot of time on. I apologize for its busyness, but here's what the chart says. If you are above the line, the dashed line, that means that your incomes are well above your costs. And so people will say things are fantastically expensive in Northern California. And so Northern California or the Northeast, you got Northern California up at the top. San Jose is the big circle. See it right at the top in the upper right. San Francisco is the little circle. So that tells you that regional prices are unbelievable. They're at 125% against all of the metropolitan areas. But their wages, their per capita wages are at 190%. And so sitting here in the middle, right here, these orange dots, that's Phoenix and that's Tucson. Those orange dots are perfectly positioned where price and cost of living, wages and cost of living are aligned, and that's been a political objective. Keep taxes low, keep wages under control, keep these all kinds of things aligned. So what this chart tells you is that everybody above the line moving in this direction is more successful than everybody on this side of the chart. I just want everybody to understand this chart. So what this is by megapolitan, these are the megapolitan, Cascadia up near Seattle and Portland, front range of the Rockies, the Great Lakes, the Gulf Coast. Northeast is this behemoth here. So that's New York City. These blue are the other cities in the Northeast megapolitan. We only have two major cities here. The Texas Triangle, these cities here, that's Dallas and Houston. Southern Florida, Sun Corridor, that's us, small one here. If you're in this zone here, it basically means that if you think, and I'll come back to that in a second. If you think that keeping living costs low by itself and costs low by itself and taxes low by itself produces economic development by itself, the answer is no. I just want that to sink in for a second. The answer is no. That is a necessary but insufficient set of conditions. So this is gross domestic product by megapolitan region. So look at that monster there, 3 trillion. That Northeast megapolitan has a larger gross domestic product than France or England or Spain or combinations of them together. This is us, Sun Corridor, the Front Range and the Gulf Coast. So there's good news about this, by the way. So this is population. We're one of the smaller, look at the size of that one. We're one of the smaller ones approaching, we'll end up in this kind of range, the 10 million person kind of range. This is per capita personal income, we're the lowest. And so those three factors, lowest population, lowest, or one of the lowest gross domestic products, and per capita personal income gives us huge opportunity with the right plan, unified in the megapolitan area between Phoenix and Tucson, to be a place to attract growth. There is stress in some of these other megapolitan areas, particularly for new businesses to get going and new things to get started. So I think there's huge opportunity here. What do I find? Tucson and Phoenix have low and nearly identical costs of living and incomes relative to megapolitan peers. Greatest opportunity for growth and expansion among the megapolitans is in this megapolitan area. We need to collaborate more with Metro Phoenix. You've heard others talk about that. You've heard me talk about that before. Increase, enhance, and beautify. This is a main thing. This middle action item, we are incapable at the moment of understanding that one of the most important things in Arizona is its physical beauty. We have one of the crappiest highways imaginable. I just came on it this morning. It is unbelievable, littered with garbage, littered with trash, littered with rubber, old buildings that make the place look like there's not a single ounce of economic positive activity in this entire region, dilapidated buildings, no landscaping, nothing. Nothing. If people think for a second that things like that don't make a difference, they're not thinking clearly. And so we have not found a way to take the natural environment in which this megapolitan is embedded and make it into a projection of the physical beauty, the natural state, all the things that this place has to offer. And then here's one I always get laughed at. Increase connections to the Southern California megapolitan. Increase connections to the Southern California megapolitan on every level and in every way. We do this. We have 12,000 students both on campus and online from California. We're running a lot of our technology transfer operation out of California. We're a part of the Los Angeles Venture Association called LAVA. We co-market our intellectual property with USC, UCLA, and Caltech in Los Angeles. We have project after project after project going on in California because that is the closest global city, Los Angeles. That is the closest global, everything, closest global airport, global city, everything. And so that's not something that people think about clearly enough, in my view. So, I summarize these action items. Arizona and Metro Tucson, economy action items, total reconceptualization, initiation of design thinking, and then I walk through each of the sectors. And so, Ron, I've put these together just as sort of a summary. Labor market actions, population actions. Some of these are on your agenda now. Some of them are not on your agenda now. But I think the most important thing here is this is just a summary of the things that I just went through in the presentation. When you come to a point where you have benefited from the success of the previous generations, which we certainly have done here, from the decisions that were made to build the economy that has been so successful, growing the state so dramatically over the last few decades, particularly since the end of World War II. When we've benefited from the kinds of businesses and industries that have either been attracted here or grown here, it sometimes becomes easy to just sit back and say, well, let's just sort of tweak this. I'm suggesting that we're well past tweaking. Tweaking will not work, and we need a redesign. So my proposal to put on the table for people to think about 4 minutes before conclusion, and I can answer a couple of questions before we have a panel, if that's all right, Ron, is I'm suggesting that we have a beautiful opportunity at this particular moment in our economic history to really take on this challenge. We have to focus on, I didn't walk through the millennials in detail. Let me go back just to them for a second. That 53rd ranking, that means then that this is the 53rd lowest city for the attraction of college graduates under the age of 40, even though there's a set of major institutions here also producing those graduates. And that's a function of, for whatever reason they want to be in different places, what do those different places look like and feel like? How do they interact? What do they have? What don't they have? And then what does that mean? This is really hard for regular people running regular companies to understand. Like the people that mock Portland. Oh, well, it's just all, the breweries and the blah, 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 and the blah, 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 and even I mock it a little bit. But it turns out, I was just up there, with Adidas at their North American headquarters. It's unbelievable. They have thousands of people. Just down the street from Nike, just down the street from somebody else, just down the street from somebody else, and somebody else, and somebody else. And if you ask these kids why they're there, they move there without a job, hoping that they can then get a job that will allow them to live there. One wants an environment where people move there without a job, hoping that the job that they could have some enjoyment from can be a part of that economy. And so it's basically about the expansion of the robustness of our regional economy here within this megapolitan. So all of our success has been fantastic because we can have this conversation. So with that, and I am still awake. My plane left Beijing yesterday at about 5 p.m. Beijing time, and then you catch up those 15 hours of time zone, eat a turkey sandwich in San Francisco, and then get back to Phoenix. So